Hello everyone, it's Fabian from GFI. Welcome back to the channel. And for all those of you, you're already aware, this is your chance. Hit the subscribe button and you're not going to miss any more of my videos in the future. Right, it's Wednesday morning and that means exactly one thing. We're right in the middle of another exciting UEFA Champions League match day 2 to be precise. And well, we've already seen half of it. The other half will be played tonight, of course. The Champions League is rotating, which means those teams that on the first match day played on a Tuesday will now play Wednesday and vice versa, of course. So that means that we've had the two games that we've seen yesterday night were Copenhagen FC hosting Bayern Munich in Denmark and Union Berlin with their first Champions League home game against Portuguese side Braga. And I thought I'm just going to give you a little bit of a debrief and my takeaways from those two matches. Well, it's quite interesting because the first match day, the 4 matches involving German participation, I said that all those 4 games, at least results-wise, went sort of per expectation, you know. We had Bayern Munich beating Manchester United at home, maybe a little bit more closer in the end than everyone expected, but I think the tendency of the result was expected. You had Real Madrid beating Union Berlin, which was also kind of expected. You had Leipzig beating Young Boys Bern, that was expected, and you had Dortmund losing in Paris versus PSG was also kind of to be expected in Dortmund's form at that time. So no real surprises there, and obviously it's going to be exciting to see how things panned out this time. So let's see how these two games went. Well, Bayern Munich came from behind to beat Copenhagen at their home stadium 2-1. And Union Berlin lost at home 2-3 to Braga. Now we're going to start with that Bayern Munich game. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the market value of both teams, Bayern Munich are of course a clear favorite. I think Copenhagen stands at some 65-66 million euros. And Bayern Munich, of course, at around 900 something million euros. Just looking at the squad market value. So no question, Bayern Munich is the clear favorite here, and I think sort of everyone expected them to win. Now Bayern, I think, has now won sort of more than 30 group games consecutively, which is a new Champions League record. They've also run 15 Champions League group games in a row, which is also a new record. So I don't think anybody really expected them not to win that game. That said, Copenhagen FC actually is quite a Champions League home heavyweight. They actually haven't lost a home game in the Champions League for 10 years. No, obviously they didn't take part in every of those 10 years, but you know, the last one that won there was, I think, Real Madrid. But even teams like Man City didn't manage to win there. I think they achieved a draw, and some other famous sides lost there. So I don't think everyone had that in mind when they saw Bayern Munich departing for Copenhagen. The game itself, I think, I don't want to go too much into player details and statistics. I think overall the game kind of turned out the way you would expect it to. Of course, with that sort of formidable forwards Bayern have in their squad, I think even among the absolute top teams in Europe, there's just really a handful of teams that would, you know, basically go head to head with Bayern in an open encounter. I think the vast majority of teams would probably play a defensive lineup and sort of, defend out of the back and looking for counterattacks, because most teams that would try to face Bayern head to head with an open visor, you know, you're just going to lose, because that firepower up front, of course, of that Bayern team with Gnabry, Musiala, Müller, Coman, Sané, and of course Harry Kane, and the 2-6s behind is just enormous. I think even in international top team comparison, it's absolutely among the very best. But of course, at the back, this Bayern side has already proved to be quite vulnerable. So what most teams do is what I think some clubs already in the Bundesliga have done, is they defend, they keep the spaces very tight. They're very focused. They just defend around the box and let Bayern run at them, and then look for opportunities to counter-attack, play long high balls over the midfield, just surpass the midfield, and looking for those Umschaltspiel, as we say in German, switch game situations where they can quickly attack Bayern at their own backyard. I think that's what we've seen against Gladbach, who've done that really well. And I think looking at the Bundesliga games so far, I think that's the one that's probably most comparable to yesterday's game. Also, Gladbach did quite a formidable job in that. Also, they couldn't sustain it and lost 2-1 in the end after going up 1-0. And that's quite similar to the game we could see yesterday. It was, of course, Bayern with a big advantage in possession, playing the ball around the box. But every now and then you had Copenhagen breaking through, running counterattacks and looking dangerous here and there. Obviously, the 1-0 lead for Copenhagen happened in the second half. The way it happened, you could argue was a little bit lucky for Copenhagen, because the ball had cleared and then it just deflected from a player and landed in front of the goal scorer, who smashed it with a volley drop kick into the goal. But then, we had a lot of those goals. You had some goals in that Champions League game versus Manchester United, which were a similar story, and in some of the Bundesliga games. And when it happens that often, it's not really a coincidence anymore. But then, Bayern, just continued with their game, really equalized through a very good Musiala single action piece, and then of course you could see that Bayern got more room because Copenhagen sort of lost the focus and the structure, but I guess the legs became tired as well, and eventually there were more spaces for Bayern, and then they substituted Müller on, Tell and Goretzka, and Müller had just one of those moments of magic. You can clearly see the speed isn't quite there anymore, but of course his overview of the game situation is amazing. And he ran forward, noticed he couldn't do it on his own, then just turned back, and waited until the space had opened for Mathis Tell, who was quite free, and he smashed it in, and Bayern won 2-1. So question really is, what do we see and what do we make of it? A lot of people were quite quick to say, well, this Bayern team, if they continue to play like that, it's good enough against Copenhagen. It's not good enough against the top teams. Of course, that's what it looks like at first glance, certainly. I'm not so sure. As I said, I think a lot of other teams have sort of failed against Copenhagen. And of course, this was the way I think everyone expected Copenhagen to play. But they did it quite well. They were obviously highly motivated when you play against Bayern Munich, clear underdog. But you could also say that Bayern, even though the goal against them just happened well into the second half, they never fell apart. And it was quite interesting to hear some of the players afterwards say in the interview. I think Sven Ulreich also said, look, a year ago we would have fallen apart after that, but now that's not what's happening. I think another player, I can't recall who did it, said something along the same lines, which kind of shows that the players are kind of aware of the situation and they're sort of pleased with the progress. And you have to admit that Bayern continued in a quite controlled fashion. So that's something, and Thomas Tuchel pointed out that Bayern continues to find the solutions. They obviously concede more at the back than they ideally would like to. That's a reoccurring thing. I mean, it looked like they switched it off against Bochum, which had arguably a really bad day and didn't, defend like Copenhagen or Gladbach did at the back. So they tried to play along as well, which of course, given the gulf in quality, had to go wrong. But they still seem to concede more than they would ideally like to. But then on the other hand, you have to applaud them, because they keep finding solutions and they keep bouncing back. So the spirit is certainly intact there. There's been some discussion about Boateng rejoining the squad. He's obviously been out of contract for some time now. For the last time he worked in France, and his contract was not extended. He's got some legal proceedings currently ongoing. So there is a big debate whether he should be allowed to rejoin or not at the moment. But there was nothing of that visible during the game. To me, Bayern played pretty much the way they've always played. Harry Kane was quite isolated. No big impact on this game. But then on the other hand, you have to admit that Copenhagen shielded him quite intensively, and so he wasn't that involved as he was in the last league games. So you could argue that as long as Bayern keeps finding those ways to win, it's all good. But then on the other hand, it was they thought they had achieved the same against Leverkusen, for example, when in extra time they conceded this penalty, and it ended with a draw. And there was almost the same sort of situation yesterday when sort of extra time Copenhagen pushed forward again, and I think there was a header from a Copenhagen player which then bounced off Choupo-Moting, who had been substituted in Choupo-Moting's leg, and Sven Ulreich was tested to one of his super reflexes to keep it out. So that was a moment of madness as compared to Muller's moment of magic. Had Ulreich not shown one of his best reactions whatsoever, this could have also ended in a draw. And that's of course a problem when you win games on these tight margins. That of course you always run the risk of one of these moments against you, and basically you either lose or just draw when you could have won the game. And I think that's the reason why Bayern need to win the games with some more points, with some more goals on the scoreboard, and not just win the games this tight. But in the end, a win is a win, and of course it makes for quite an interesting table reading in Bayern's group. Manchester United lost again at home, which means of course Bayern tops the group with 6 points, followed by Galatasaray, Copenhagen, and Manchester United in 4th place. So of course Bayern has best chances of going through, but doubters will continue to look at Bayern and point out that they're not ready yet for the very big tournaments. And Thomas Tuchel will have to prove that he can sort things out. I believe I can see that the Bayern can run the higher gears. You can see the gears are there. They just need to activate them. And it's a question whether Tuchel can do that or not. Let's look at the other game, Union Berlin versus Braga. Now, you remember from the first match day that Union Berlin was so close of, earning their first ever Champions League point at the famous Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid. They lasted at 0-0 to the very end. And then, of course, Jude Bellingham, smashed in from very short distance, deflected ball, Unlucky for Berlin, of course, it was an absolutely deserved victory for Real Madrid, who had, a mass of chances and deserved the win, no question about that. But as a sort of Union Berlin fan, and it's hard not to be in that case when you look at their story. Coming up from the second division, and 5 years later they're playing Champions League, and it's an amazing story. And you just think like for the fans who have traveled, for the supporters, for everyone who's sort of with that team, you kind of would have granted it to them. So the big question was, could they do it at home now? And well, it wasn't quite home, because their stadium Alte Försterei isn't deemed fit for Champions League football. So they actually went to the stadium of their arch rivals Hertha BSC and played in the Olympiastadion, which has a lot more capacity. So it was an absolute sellout. The usually blue and white Olympiastadion was red. 73,000, I think, was the spectator number. Everything was ready for the big Union Berlin party, and things started good. They had an offside goal, which wasn't given. I think rightly so, not given. But then Geraldo Becker scored the first and the second, so Union Berlin was 2-0 up, and everything looked like now they're going to do it. They're going to win their first Champions League game. Braga bounced back, though, and first got the 2-1, and then quite some time later equalized. And there were phases in the game where Berlin actually could have added the third one, but it wasn't to be. And then when you just thought, well, it's gonna settle for a draw, which is a bit of a pity, because I'm not saying they should have, but they certainly could have won the game. Just when you thought that, it's 2 missed points, actually they lost the last one as well, and Braga made the 3-2 in at the very end again, similar to the Madrid game. So Berlin was again set for a draw, and then sort of gave the game away in its closing stages, which is, of course, in front of 73,000 people, an absolute utter heartbreak, except for those traveling Braga fans, of course. And again, I asked myself, what can we make of that? I think looking, versus Madrid, things were clear. It's kind of anything other than the Madrid win would have been an absolute sensation. Now here things were different. I think if you look at Braga, I think has a market value of around 125 million euros. Union Berlin has almost 200 million euros in market value in terms of the squad. So this is not like Copenhagen versus Bayern. This is actually much more on a sort of par level. I think from their squad level, I think Berlin should have had any chance to win this game. And I think whether in a better form, they probably would have. But things are not going well for them in the league. They've now lost 3-4 games in a row, and it's sort of a little mini crisis at Union Berlin, which from an outside perspective I think is well understandable. In fact, if you look in the Bundesliga, in the last 10-15 years, there's always been some teams that have got it right for one season, do remarkably well, manage to get in the European competitions. But then here's the thing: you have one good season. What usually happens is there's interest in the sort of emerging big players. They move to big clubs. They've sort of failed to invest the money correctly. And next team, when they're actually in Europe because they had a good season, they fail to reproduce it. And at least after 2 or 3 years, most teams that sort of come from lower regions historically of the table can't cope with it and come down again. That's what we see with most teams that unexpectedly perform well. And I think for the past 5 years, people with Union Berlin have thought, okay, when is this going to crash down? Because it just went better, and better. And they played the first Bundesliga season, and you thought, well, they were a bit lucky. It's not going to happen again next year, but it was. They just kept improving, and everyone thought, well, it's got to come at some point, and I think it is going to come this season. I'm not gonna. I can't say how bad it's gonna be. I know in my prediction, Bundesliga prediction, I put them, I think, at 5 or 6, relatively high up. But I think it seems this relapse is coming now. Of course, they have this sort of much higher amount of games because they have a Bundesliga at the weekends. They've got the Champions League in between, inside the week. And then obviously with the improved quality of the team, you have more players in the national teams, which are away when there's no Champions League. There's national teams playing, so these players are away as well. They've got some injured players now. That's the typical thing. Once things go wrong, they go wrong in every department, and bad luck is gets complemented by more bad luck, and then sort of those little things. The tight game that maybe you won in the last minute, now you lose it in the last minute. Sort of Berlin obviously wasn't far away, and in terms of the quality of the opponent they played, they could have won that game, and I think in the spirit that they've been half a year ago, they probably would have. But that's exactly the thing. I think this game shows exactly where the mood and the spirit Union Berlin is in right now. This sort of decisive element, this little thing that you need to win such a tight game or to see out such a tight game, is missing right now, because the confidence sort of is taking a little crack, a little and suddenly this confidence that you can do anything and everything will be all right suddenly is gone, and suddenly these things that looked so effortless before do require a lot of effort, and I don't know how deep the fall will be. I think, of course, the Champions League will continue for them. They are 0 points right now after 2 match days. Of course, the group stage will continue. Theoretically, everything's still possible, but on a serious note, of course, I think they're probably more worried about their Bundesliga situation than on the Champions League situation. I think Urs Fischer, their Swiss coach, who's been sort of a pole of calmness, he's probably I think looking at the Champions League like a bonus thing they've earned, and I think he's looking more at the Bundesliga as their bread and butter thing. And of course, at the moment, the eyes are more focused down than up, I think. So they need to get back to winning ways in the Bundesliga, especially they recently even lost against Heidenheim, which by all, no disrespect, but Heidenheim, a team that is good in spirit, but certainly for a Champions League club, shouldn't be such a big hurdle. Once again, they've done a good job, but you can see that Union Berlin currently is missing the confidence in what they can do, and you see that in the Champions League, and it's a bit of a shame because this time I think against Braga, they certainly were good for a point, if not even 3 points. But right now they're missing the necessary winning spirit, the necessary element. And it will be interesting to see how they settle in the Bundesliga and continue their games. Right, so for Bayern Munich, everything is looking as business as usual, even though both games were a little bit closer than they probably should have been. But it's not going to stop Bayern Munich, and I cannot see them crashing out in the Champions League group stage. Berlin, it's the opposite thing. I believe if they manage to get third, which would get them into the Europa League, that would already be a good result for them. And their focus should, of course, be sort of salvaging their Bundesliga campaign, and maybe even resting some of the players in the Champions League. I don't know if they are that far already, but this could be a very difficult season for them, because with every game you lose, of course, the psychological damage and the damage to the team spirit gets worse and worse. So that's it for now. I'm gonna be excited to see the 2 games tonight. See Leipzig and Dortmund play, and we're gonna talk about it tomorrow. Until then, Let me know what you think in the comment section, and other than that, see you all tomorrow. Goodbye.